Hey, this is Paul Payton with Focal Splash, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how I blend images together in Photoshop. Alright, so we'll get right into this. Just like most things in Photoshop, there are several ways to do anything. This is the way I do it. If you can show me an easier, faster, more accurate way to do it, I'd be very grateful. This is the third in a series of tutorials where I composite this image. When blending images, there are many things that can cause a subject to look out of place. First of all, there's light direction and perspective. If the image is taken from the top looking down at a child, it's going to be hard to put the child in a picture when you're looking at the side of the child. The same with light direction. If there's a lot of harsh light, then you're going to have to adjust your composite to have light coming from the direction of the light source. And in this case, we don't have harsh light coming from any direction, so we can pretty much choose what direction we want the light to be coming from. Basically, those two things are very difficult to adjust, especially for perspective. Very difficult, if not impossible. But the things we can adjust are exposure, contrast, and color. We want to be able to match the color of the light, basically, that's hitting the girl and the elephant and the clouds and the castle. We want to be able to adjust all that, and that's the main thing that this tutorial is about. So we put the pieces together in previous tutorials. We slapped them into place here, and what we have is the girl. All right, we have the elephant. We have the shadow for the elephant. That's important. And we have the castle, and we have the background, the main background, and then the dramatic clouds that we're going to add in. All right, and so what we want to do first is I want to position the background because I'd like it to be a little bit higher. So I'm going to select on that layer, hit Control T, and I can't because it's locked. Go ahead and I'll just unlock it, and then hit Control T, and I'm just going to click on this. That will lock the ratio so it doesn't get squished one way or the other, and then just make this a little bit bigger like that, and then move it up, plop it right in there. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, next thing to do is position the elephant. You have to hit enter to get out of the transform. All right, and so I select the elephant layer, and what we're going to do with him is Control T on him. I'm going to spin him this way so he looks more like he's walking flat instead of pointed down like that. All right, spin him this way, move him back just a little bit. I'm going to make him a little bigger. I like him about like that. I want him to look as though he's dropped down with his feet into the clouds a little bit. Something like that. Alright. Next thing I want to do is position a shadow. This way of doing a shadow is very nice. You notice how the shadows around here are bluish and his shadow is gray or black. You know, it's based on, so it's not that color. And really, we want the shadows to match, but this way of creating a shadow is a solid color layer. So what we can do is we can move this to blue, and we can raise this over to here. It's more of a cyan than blue, the shadows. So we try and match the color of the shadows, and then hit OK. And we have a little bit better, and that's not exactly right, so let's make it even more cyan. And we want to keep it darker. I'm thinking that should work. It just looks better than black. And then I'm going to hit Control T on that. And because I moved him, his shadow is going to be quite a bit longer. And I want to put it up a little bit as well, because we're going to hide part of his feet. See, this shadow here is for that foot, and this shadow here is for that foot, and that one could be for that foot. So let's make it even bigger. Something like that. Put them right there. So we're going to put a layer mask on the elephant. Here's where you put the layer mask on. I'm going to hide part of the elephant's feet. I can hit D to get the default colors, and then X change to black. Choose B for the brush tool, and just see what happens if we just begin to. I'm using a very soft brush. There's a hardness of 0. Right? So it's going to leave a fade on the selection here. And this would just be like his toe. And these guys over here can have a little more, a little higher with because they're further away. And make the brush a little bit smaller. And something like that. I'm liking it. I like that. The shadow's not exactly in the right position, so let's see what happens if I Control T on the shadow and bring it up. You buying that? I'm buying that. I'm thinking that right there is interesting. I'm going to add some shadow, so I'm going to paint with a white brush on that layer, on the shadow's layer mask. It's funny to paint white to get a black shadow, but that's what you do. I'm going to set it at 10% opacity by pressing the number 1 there, and I'm just going to paint right here, because there would be a little more shadow right there where his leg is, of course. Something like that. Not quite there, like that. I don't like that. It's 10%. Let's make it 1%. See if we can't get a little more nuance. Okay. It's looking pretty good to me. Let's throw a little bit of shadow here. That's a little crazy looking. So we'll go back again to 1% and just say, all right, we'll paint a bunch of times just to say, okay, he's got a shadow there under his foot. I like it. All right. So I think he's positioned really well. So let's go ahead and position her. Zooming in, you can press the Z key and do that, or you can press the spacebar key, which is the moving around tool. And if you press the spacebar key and you hit the command key, then you can zoom and then let go of the command key. You're positioning, hold the command key and zooming. That's with the spacebar. I'm selected on her. I'm in at V for the move tool. I want her right about here. I definitely want her larger. I'll put her right about there. And I'm going to lean her forward. She's a forward-leaning girl. She's a little big. I think she's positioned pretty well. All right. And something we're going to do here is I'm going to grab the puppet warp tool, not part of the tutorial here, because if it was, it would be a long tutorial. So I'm going to put a spot here, spot here, spot here, just to hold her in place. And I'm going to drag her hand right like this down. Move this in just a little bit. Just like that. And her foot, I'm going to give her a knee, a spot, and then I'm going to kick her foot back a little bit so we can see it coming out behind the ear. Enter on that. Now she's warped. I bet you weren't expecting that. I like what we're seeing here. The next thing I'd like to do is position the castle. So first of all, Control T on that and make it a little bigger. Pretty. It's looking pretty. I want it a little high. We're gonna have to put some clouds under that castle to buoy it up. But pretty. I like that. What do you think? Enter. Let's click on the elephant layer and the shadow layer and the girl. Control click on all three, and then V with the move tool. I'm just going to move them all back a little bit. Something like that. I think that's a better composition. I think the castle, it's all just fine tuning. Just play with this. We can move the castle back a little bit more. Make the castle even a little bigger maybe. Okay. So I like that composition. We have castle she's going to. It's way over there. We got the girl. All right. So the next thing I want to adjust is the elephant's ear. I'm going to hit the space bar and control, zoom in. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and make this selection of the elephant's ear here. So I'm going to turn the layer of the girl off and use the quick select tool. Make it small enough to make sense here. And painting like this, and let's see what it does. Did a pretty good job. All right, I'm going to go into select and mask real quick. Use the quick select tool in here and deselect this. See what it does. All right, I like it. And I'm just going to hit OK. And it totally got rid of the elephant. Oh, no, there's the elephant. And there's the girl. I'm going to drop the girl down below the elephant's ear here. I'm going to adjust this layer mask by pressing B to get the brush tool and painting with black, so I can swap it by hitting X. Painting with black, and I want to put her hand. The reason that's not working is because the opacity is set to 1%. It was working, just not very fast. So I'm going to hit 0 to get the opacity back up to 100. Select the layer mask and just paint right there. Right? That puts her hand over the top instead of underneath. And this layer mask, you saw that when I was messing with this little section right here. Didn't obey me very well. So I'm going to make the brush pretty small and paint with black and just straighten that line out a little bit. Paint with white. Paint that back in. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to put a shadow right along here so it looks like the ear is covering her leg. So I'm going to hit Control and click right here on the layer mask. That makes a selection out of the layer mask. So I have this part still selected. And then I'm going to use the lasso tool, remove part of the selection from the lasso tool here. Just grab this right here, down here, all of this right here, and remove that from the selection. I just have this section right here selected. And then I'm create a new layer and paint with black. I should paint with dark blue, right? Or cyan, maybe, but real dark. And hit OK. And I'm just going to hit Alter Option, Delete. And that's going to fill a layer with that bluish color. All right? Drop this layer down below. So now that layer is hitting. Control D, deselect that, and move this layer a little bit with the V for the move tool. Just tap over a little bit, down a little bit. You know, see now we have a little line there. Next thing, I'm going to put a Gaussian blur on it. So blur it a little bit because shadow isn't normally that sharp. And I'm liking that. I don't really like the color of the shadow. Space and Command, zoom in a little bit. Yeah, that's way too blue. Real quick, go into Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. Problem is it's just too saturated, so take the saturation down, making it look like it's black. Black is probably better. Give it a little bit more, just a hair of color there. And darkness, you know, something like that. Boom, I like it. Issues are, we're going to put a layer mask on it. We don't expect there to be the same shadow here as there's here because it's further from her skin than her leg. So on the layer mask, painting with black and probably 50% opacity. I'm just going to erase. It's not really erasing, but you know, just erase some of that there and put it back by hitting X, painting in white. Put it back here because I erased a little too much. All right. Okay, and now another thing to do for her leg is a layer underneath her, but on top of the elephant. We're going to paint with it. I was going to paint with the same color, but let's go ahead and make it darker. 50% opacity sounds good for now. And just right along the edge of her leg. This is another way I could have done it without creating a layer and all that. And just painting right around here to cast a little shadow on the elephant from her body. It's called a contact shadow. Wherever two things touch, there's going to be a bit of a shadow. Alright, because it's blocking light. Now, hit X. I don't want to paint with white, so that's not it. I'm going to hit E just real quick and make sure that my brush is real soft. Alright, it is. And I'm just going to erase on the outside edges of that. It's a little too far. Okay, like it. And I like that. Okay, and now I'm going to create another layer. And I'm going to also paint with the dark color. And I'm going to make the brush 10% opacity. And I'm just going to paint, just giving a little more shadow to the outside here, because she would be casting what's called a ambient light shadow. So something like that. I think she's blending in pretty good. Maybe on top of her, but below the ear, we create another layer and give her leg a little bit of ambient shadow from the ear. Same with the boot. Just a hint of a shadow there. Definitely is going to be shadow right here, right in between her and the elephant. This is below her and above the elephant, so it's actually on top of her. So that's not what I want to do. I don't want to put a shadow on top of her. I want it to be below her right here on the elephant. Right, something like that. And create a clipping mask so it's not coloring the sky behind just the elephant. Okay, so we got some shadows making her blend in really nice. So now we're going to go with the sky, the back of the sky. Boom, there's perfect. That works great. Actually, it kind of does look neat, doesn't it? But what we're going to do is blend this in, get rid of this part here. I'm going to go ahead and drop this down below the background layer. Like I said, there's lots of ways to do this. And I'm going to make a quick select of the sky here. It should be all one color. So on this layer, let's see what happens when we make a quick selection. That's pretty good. We're going to hold the Alt key and deselect this and see if we can't keep some of that. Yeah, something like that. It's a good place to start. And I'm going to just hit create a layer mask and Control I to invert that layer mask, and then turn on the background sky. So, do you like that? It doesn't look that great. Well, I know. Okay, so what we do now is go to this layer mask with the brush, and we can paint with the white brush first at about 20%, and we can just add some of that in to blend that in. And then I want to paint with the black brush, and actually with the white brush here about 50%. I want to add some of this just like this. I really like this formation here. I don't want to get rid of that. And yeah, I like those clouds there. They're probably hidden by the elephant, but you know. Alright. So we have that going. And what do I need to do now is to make a color adjustment. These two skies don't match. That's not even possible. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the color of the top sky. We're going to make it more cyan. So I'm going to create a Hue Saturation layer and just move it in this direction, because you know blue's here, cyan's here. So if you just move everything in that direction, we're going to get closer. You get too far, you got green. Just move it a little closer. It's a little saturated compared to the other, so we got that going on. It's a little too green for me. Something like that. Right? matching better. The shadows, so let's put a curves adjustment layer here, and we need to change the color of the shadows. So red and cyan are opposite colors, and if we wanted to just change the color of the shadows, kind of lock those in and then bring this down and bring this back down, and then we're going to add a little blue into the shadows. So lock these points like that, and the shadows, we're just going to add a little more blue and something like that. And now we can go back to RGB. We can go back to the hue and saturation layer and give it a little bit more blue instead of cyan, something like that. Okay, colors aren't matching 100% perfectly, but they're a lot closer. Let's go ahead, and I like the color in the clouds, so let's go ahead and try to adjust the base clouds color a little bit. First of all, I'm going to put a hue and saturation layer, and I'm just doing this by, let's go ahead and create a clipping mask so it only affects the bottom clouds, and making them a little bit more blue. Just a point. And generally speaking, I'm thinking they match pretty good. Two different kinds of clouds, but we're going to cover them up with some cloud brush actually. But I think as a background, I notice this is what it is. See this yellow here? What we have is the highlights are kind of yellow on those bottom clouds, and I'd rather them be closer to white. So I'm going to create a color balance layer. It's another type of color layer, and in the highlights, I'm going to make those highlights a little more blue. All right, and we're going to clip it so it doesn't affect everything. So now these highlights are actually more blue than the sky above it. This almost looks yellow. All right, so we'll just bring it back a little bit until we get a good kind of match. Now there's a special action I've created, and I didn't come up with the idea myself, but if you've seen Flern tutorials, you should check out Flern. But I created an action similar to one that he had that will let us create a test group. So above all the layers, just going to play this, and it creates a test group. What this is for is to let us see with more intensity the colors. So I'm going to say see saturation. So you can see that this is very saturated, lots of blue, and this is not very saturated. All right, you can see that. And see color. All right, you can see these are the colors that you can see. There's kind of a red right here that's, and it's there. And so, we can see colors, but let's boost the saturation on those colors so we can really see what's going on. All right, so they're matching pretty good. We have a little bit of oranges here and a little bit of oranges down here. They've got this bluish here, cyan, bluish cyan. So, they're matching pretty close. I don't think we need to make much adjustment on that. Now I want to look at the contrast of the image to see if it matches. It just basically quickly turns it to black and white so we can see, is this too dark and this too light? And this is kind of dark. There's nothing really that dark in this part of the picture. I think I'm just going to leave it for now, or I could go ahead and make a slight adjustment to the clouds here by creating a curves adjustment layer and pulling up a little bit, just a little bit like that, and also pulling up on the darks just a hair. That's quite a bit more than a hair, but let's make it about 10, something like that. All right, so I think the black and white, the things match up pretty good, and you'd be shocked. It's important to see what things look like in black and white, even if it's a color image. All right, so we're a little closer there, and this is checking the exposure. This is what I do later normally, but you can brighten the whole image up and you can see if there's anything odd, because some people's screens are brighter, some people's screens are darker, and you can see things that you can't see. For instance, you see a whole lot more red in here than you saw. Well, I can see a whole lot more red and orange in here than what I saw before. Maybe I'd want to get rid of that. You know, when it's bright, I can't hardly see that. So I just use this to just take a look and see what's going on. So you can see the direction of the sun is from over here, blocked by the clouds here, but the sun's kind of coming through that direction, and it's still the same direction over here. So there we have that. And so bring that back, we just reset that, turn it off. So we have the sky, I like it. We have the castle. That's going to be neat when we get to doing that. We have the shadow, the elephant, little shadows on the elephant. All right, we got the girl, and all right. So we have all the things turned back on. Clicking on this right here, hitting the V key. I'm thinking of move it like this, and with the, I don't want to mess up this layer mask. So what you can do is you can group that, just that section into a group, and then add a layer mask to the whole group, and then you're able to mask out some of it without hurting the previous layer mask. So go to 100%, painting with black. Hit the V key for the move tool. I'm going to drop it down to, you know, somewhere like that. All right. And do we want the opacity of this castle? Do we want to be able to see through it a little bit? You know, just a little bit, so there's clouds kind of in front of it. I think so. All right, so it's not so clear back there. To me, the castle's a little bit bright, so inside I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer and just bring down its brightness. Make sure it's clipped to just the castle. Bring down the brightness of the castle a little bit, because it is over there in the shade. All right, and like I said before, I want to adjust the background. Put a curves adjustment layer here, and this should bring down the whole background. Give it a little more dramatic. Again, we see that the brightness here doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer right next to the one that I created. And I'm going to bring it down. That's crazy, right? Yep. And I'm going to bring down the bright section here. And then hit Control I, and that turns it off. You can't see it anymore. With the brush, I'm going to paint with a white brush and just paint right here. And that's bringing down the opacity of that layer. Okay, don't really like what's going on there. Bring it down, bring it up. I can fix the red now with this layer. So go to red and drop the red a little bit. Go to blue, pick blue up a little bit. Just a touch, not too much. I'm going to go ahead and create a hue and saturation layer. Don't be afraid to create a lot of layers to get your work done. I used to be afraid to create a lot of layers. But hue and saturation layer, I'm going to bring down, make it a little more black and white. And what we're dealing with is yellow. It's kind of hard. I'm going to try this. Bring this to this and hit Colorize. And we're going to try and just change the color. All right, and hit Control I. We don't want that everywhere. I just want to paint with white right here. Trying to change the color of that. I don't like that. Now it's black and white. Oh, colorize. Come on. I told you to colorize. Alright. Okay. Go back to the curves adjustment layer. Brighten it up a little bit. Alright, played enough with that. Alright, so do we like the slightly yellow color on the elephant and the girl? You know, warm yellow color is nice normally. Let's see what happens if we put the girl and the elephant and even the elephant shadow. We select all that by hitting shift and selecting all, and hit Control G, putting all in a group. That way we can create a color balance layer and clip it to the group, and then we'll take a little bit of the yellow out of the highlights. See how fast that happens. Just, you know, put yellow in, take yellow out. You don't want to take too much yellow out, just a little bit. Put a little more blue there. And I think she's matching pretty good. I'm gonna give her just a little more blue because I want her to highlights to match the white there almost. All right. And do we need any blue in the shadows? In the shadows, we do need some cyan because we're dealing with the cyan colored shadows here. And so since we did that, we can go back to highlights and give her just a little more, less like that. All right, and again with the shadows, I think I'm going to give her a little blue. The whole thing a little blue. So the shadow's a little more blue and the highlights are a little more white. All right, and so we have a pretty good composition going here. Below this group, all right, here is the castle. Okay, so let's create another group right here. And that'll be in between the girl and the elephant and the castle. And inside that group, I want to put a layer, so just make sure it drops inside there with a big brush. With a real big brush at about 30%. Press 3 to get to 30% here. And I want to paint, press the Alt key and choose maybe this color. It's kind of gray. I'm looking for probably almost white. That might be white. Just paint right here. Give it another click here. So we're causing the sun to look like it's coming from this direction. We're brightening this up. Okay. Lots of ways to make sunbeams. One of the ways is to create a new layer. And painting with a fairly soft brush at 100% and putting some different sized dots, even lines. Let's just draw a line here, draw a line there. And you're like, what are you doing drawing these lines? That doesn't look real at all. Nope. So then go to Filter, Blur, and Radial Blur. Take this spot, put it up here in the corner. All right, and we're going to zoom and quality. Go ahead and put best, tons of blur, and hit OK. Okay, I like that. Let's go ahead and put the opacity down because, you know, sunbeams like that, come on, really? Something like that. And on that same layer, we'll just paint a few smaller lines. Just like that, you know, just gonna do the same thing. Filter, Radial Blur. If you just do that, it chooses the same radial blur you used last time. Okay, kind of like that. I'm going to lower the opacity even more. I'm going to take this layer and put it over the girl too. So We have lines coming from the sky. That's one of many ways you can create beams of light. Let's lower the opacity even more. Something like that. 20% sounds good. Okay. All right. And now one of the final touches here. We can do this between the elephant and the sky, and then on top of the elephant. And so let's start first. Between the elephant and the sky. So you could name groups. Makes things easier. Right. So right here in between them, creating a layer, and on this layer, select a brush. Now, I don't have a link to this brush. This is a cloud brush that I got from Flern. There's lots of different cloud brushes out there, but we look at this. We have size jitter up, so it changes the size of the brush as you paint. Scatter. It changes the scattering, so it scatters it around. It doesn't paint exactly where you painted, but scatters it around, makes it look more like clouds. Transfer, we have flow jitter, so that they're not all the same density, and smoothing is always on. And so that's what I'm doing with this brush. So right here, and change the size of the brush. And let's just play with it. So start by painting it in. Oh boy, look at that. Painting some down here. That's a little too much, so I'm going to hit Control Z, 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 like that. Make the brush a little bit smaller. Let's see what happens if I paint it across here. It's a little too dense for me. Let's lower the opacity to 50%, the brush. All right, I kind of like that better. We don't want to cover everything. We just want to just put a hint of cloud back there. Right. I tried to deal with the colors of this thing back here so much. All right. So I really like the darkness there. All right. And so you might think, well, those clouds don't look too realistic. Well, that's one of the things we can do is hit Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, and the clouds are going to be a little blurry, aren't they? Because that's the way clouds are. So just bring the blur down to something that looks good, and there we have that. Next thing, I'm just going to create another layer and put this right yeah, you notice that it put it in the back, which is okay, but I'll put this above the elephant. All right, and make it nice, bigger. I think the scattering isn't going to work too well for us, so let's go to scattering and bring that down just a little bit. All right, let's see what we got. Size down a little bit. I want to cover this a little here. There we go. So he's coming out of the clouds here. All right, I'm liking that. Put a little more density here. All right, great. And I'll put a little Gaussian blur on that too, just to, I'll just hit Gaussian blur and see what we get. All right, I like that. All right, so here we have, I'm really not finished, but you don't want to sit here for another hour with me while I play with the shadows and the clouds and that sort of thing. But you get the idea. So we have a composite where we adjusted her color, position, shadow, lighting, cut her out, and all that. If you have any questions, I'm interested in hearing them. I'd really like to answer questions. I like doing that. So if you need anything else, leave a comment. Let me know. Let me know what the next tutorial you'd like to see would be. And that's it. Have a good day. Thanks.